Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. The world waits anxiously for Trump's impending tariffs as businesses, consumers and investors prepare for an all-out trade war. Israel issues evacuation warnings for Rafah, vowing to return to combat in great force after the bodies of emergency workers are discovered. And China launches military drills around Taiwan as a warning against Taiwanese independence. Now to our top story, and US President Donald Trump will take historic action tomorrow to improve American competitiveness as he prepares to impose his global tariff promises. Speaking at the White House in just the last hour, the press secretary Karoline Leavitt told reporters President Trump was with trade and tariff teams right now and was focusing on making American manufacturing a superpower. Here's what she had to say.
Well, the ultimate change for these companies in these countries, Mark, will happen when they decide to do business in the United States of America. And as I just laid out, they will face no tariffs at all if these companies choose to invest here in the United States and to move their production and their manufacturing here to the United States as well. As for tomorrow, the president will be addressing the decades of unfair trade practices that have ripped our country off and American workers off. It has hollowed out our middle class. It has destroyed our heartland, and the president is focused on reshifting our global economy to ensure that America is once again the manufacturing superpower of the world.
Last night, President Trump told reporters his so-called Liberation Day would mean a rebirth for the United States.
I think this is going to be an amazing, I call it a lot of different names, but it's really, in a sense, it's a rebirth of a country, because how we could have afforded to do what we did. We help everybody, and they don't help us. The term I like best probably is the liberation of America. It's a liberation of this country, because it's incredible. Look, we have $36 trillion in debt for a reason, and that accumulates over a long period of time. So I think what you're going to be seeing over the next couple of days will be very inspiring to a lot of people.
We can now go live to Washington to speak to our international correspondent, Sara Firth. Sara, thank you for joining me. First of all, what more do we know about this so-called Liberation Day in America?
Yes, so as you heard President Trump saying just there are many names for it, Leigh Ann. It's all very secretive at the moment. We've had the White House press conference just taking place. Not really many more details about exactly what we can expect. But what we do know right now for certain, the time and the place, is going to be 4 p.m. at the Rose Garden. Liberation Day, according to some, the event itself called Make America Wealthy Again. And this is going to be the announcement from the president of what is expected by many to be the most aggressive tariffs announced yet. But we're going to have to wait and see until that event. At the moment, we've been told that the president is discussing with trade advisors, with his brilliant team, according to the White House press secretary, to come up with this deal that she said just a short time ago will mean more jobs, more investments, more money in the pocket of American people. That's what the White House claims.
Sara, it's all so secretive indeed. We've all been trying to get some information. But do we have any clues at all as to what the potential tariff announcement could actually include?
Well, Leigh Ann, the noises coming from the White House have been a little bit contradictory. You've had various claims made. Now, as a bit of background, what's being said that's on the table, it's thought right now, is that various trade advisors have come to the president and presented plans for tariffs, and he's at the moment deciding which of those plans are best. Some of the ideas that have been floated that we could possibly see is something like a universal tariff, which would be around 20% blanket tariff on all countries around the world. Now, a lot of people say that wouldn't leave much room for negotiation. You've seen one of Trump's top trade advisors, Peter Navarro, he's come out and said look, over a decade, that would bring in $6 trillion to America. You've had critics hit back at that and say that figure is unrealistic. You would have to negotiate down, and you can't negotiate with the entire world. It's Donald Trump we're speaking about, so perhaps he will think he can. Another possibility that's been on the table, that's being floated and talked about here in DC, is a dollar-for-dollar tariff on each country, so true reciprocal tariffs. Asked at that White House press conference just a short while ago, we heard Caroline Leavitt say, in response to a question as to what exactly in terms of countries talking to the US is going on behind closed doors right now. Are countries calling the US to try and make deals? And she didn't give much information, but she did say, yes, several countries have already got in touch with the United States. But the president, she said, he's focused on one country, and that's America right now.
And finally, Sara, we talked the other day about market reaction to the announcement of auto tariffs that will come into effect in just a few days' time. What's been the reaction to the news of possibly even more tariffs on top of that?
Yes, and last time, Leigh Ann, as we said, the markets don't like that uncertainty. You've actually had the S&P just come out and have their worst month loss since 2022. Now, all three of the major trading indexes, they've all taken a hit. There was a little bit of a bounce back on Monday. Again, you had the White House press secretary answering questions about this. What is the president going to be looking for ahead of announcing these possible tariffs and with the auto tariffs that have already been announced that we spoke about the other day? She said, look, Wall Street, according to the president, will be absolutely fine. And she also said, remember what President Trump said, that the market is a snapshot in time. Well, if that is the case, Leigh Ann, right now, there is a huge amount of uncertainty. And as we heard from the White House press secretary there, all eyes are going to be on that press conference at 4 p.m. tomorrow in the Rose Garden for the so-called Liberation Day. And as the White House press secretary said, we'll see you tomorrow to see what happens there.
Yeah, I'll definitely be watching tomorrow and maybe see you too. Sara Firth in Washington, thank you so much for that roundup for us. Let's get into this further now with Nick Loris, Executive Vice President of C3 Solutions. Nick, thanks so much for joining me. So the US had a $1.2 trillion goods trade deficit in 2024, and the largest deficits were with China and Mexico. Now, this is Donald Trump's main point of contention. His administration believes the US has been ripped off by both allies and enemies. Will Trump's proposed tariffs reduce this deficit and make America great again?
Well, thank you for having me. They might reduce the deficit, although that's unclear given all of the reciprocal tariffs and tit for tat that we may see imposed by other countries. But I think the trade deficit number is a little bit misleading. The real reason we have those deficits is because other countries produce goods that American companies and families need at a lower, more efficient cost. I have a trade deficit with my grocery store, but that doesn't mean I'm getting ripped off. It just means they provide something for me that I can't provide at home. And so if we want to talk about the federal national debt, yes, that is an issue worth addressing, but these trade deficit numbers are misleading to scare people that we're somehow getting ripped off, when the reality is we benefit a lot from this global exchange of goods and services.
The extent of Trump's tariffs plans are still pretty much largely unknown, as Sara Firth was just explaining to us. However, on Sunday, he said that reciprocal tariffs will target all nations that impose duties on US goods. As a US-based company, what is your analysis on the messaging surrounding the implementation of these tariffs? Has it been clear enough?
Well, it's not been clear enough. The only thing clear about it is so far we know the economic costs of these tariffs are significant, and they're only going to get worse the longer this trade war persists. We've seen costs escalate for American families and businesses, and despite the administration's promise to help bring more manufacturing jobs to the United States, the important thing to remember is that a lot of American manufacturers use steel and aluminum and the goods that we are importing and are now being tariffed and have higher costs. So it's actually going to harm more manufacturing and more businesses than it helps. So no, the implementation has not been clear. I think if you look at the cost of these tariffs, it's only going to get worse the higher these tariffs are and the more aggressive the administration is.
You work for C3 Solutions, who are striving to create a future where economic growth and environmental protection basically go hand in hand. How do you view Trump's drill, baby, drill pledge?
Yeah, well, I do think it's important that we are going to be using natural resources like oil and natural gas for a long time. And the United States not only has a competitive advantage when it comes to that, but also an environmental advantage that we produce oil at a lower emissions rate than most other countries. And so if the world is going to continue using more fossil fuels, which it will by all accounts, then it makes sense to produce here in the United States that has a strong environmental record. At the same time, we could not ignore the large growth in renewables, the opportunities to advance nuclear and geothermal power. And that's where we've been frustrated with the administration's rhetoric to ignore opportunities to expand renewables, wind and solar on federal lands, more transmission lines to get more clean power, and to lower trade barriers so it makes it easier to build clean energy in the United States and abroad.
What is the likely impact of Donald Trump's tariffs on the average Americans? And you there in America for us, you're an American company. What is your perceived view of what's happening now, especially when it comes to global trade?
Yeah, well, this is not going to be good for Main Street. You know, despite the administration's goals to protect American families and help them, as well as to help the heartland of America, it's going to do far more harm than good. We've seen estimates that this is going to increase costs for families anywhere from $1,200 a year up to $6,000 per year. The more these tariffs persist and are increased. And I understand the Trump administration's willingness to identify the tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers that exist in other countries. We should be working with other countries to reduce them. The reciprocity here should be to lower non-trade barriers and to lower tariffs that are imposed on the United States, rather than have this reciprocity that's only going to increase costs for American families and disadvantage many American businesses who are competing not just in the United States, but in the international market, and all for no real benefit. I think that's the other important part to underscore is we're not going to see any intended achieved benefit of bringing American manufacturing back home as a result of this policy.
Nick Loris, Executive Vice President of C3 Solutions. Your insights were fascinating. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks so much.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. A 63-year-old woman has been rescued from the rubble of a building in Myanmar's capital city. The rescue comes as a ray of hope, even as expectations of finding survivors fade. Over 2,000 people have died in Myanmar in last week's earthquake, which has added to the complications of an ongoing 4-year-long crisis brought on by a civil war. President Putin has ordered the largest conscription drive since the war in Ukraine began. A further 160,000 Russian men have been ordered to be called up to be completed by July. It comes as peace talks drag out. Authorities in Iceland have evacuated a town after fears of a volcano eruption. Lava has begun flowing at a volcano near the town of Grindavik, where some 40 homes have been evacuated. An intense earthquake storm followed the flow, similar to previous eruptions. And Irish actors Paul Mescal and Barry Keoghan will portray members of the Beatles in 4 upcoming movies. Mescal has been named as Sir Paul McCartney, whilst Keoghan will take the part of Ringo Starr. John Lennon will be played by Harris Dickinson, and Joseph Quinn will complete the band as George Harrison. Each film will focus on a different member, with the first release in 2028. Now, Israel has ordered the evacuation of most of Rafah, with a warning that forces will return to combat in great force. It comes a day after the bodies of more than a dozen emergency workers were recovered from a mass grave in the region. The US has said it expects all parties on the ground in Gaza to comply with humanitarian law. We can now go to our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Trent Murray. Trent, thanks for joining me. The United Nations is demanding answers for the aid workers' deaths in Gaza. How has Israel responded to this incident, which did take place on the 23rd of March?
Yeah, Leigh Ann, that's right. That international condemnation continues to grow, as does demands for accountability over this incident, in which, yet again, it seems humanitarian workers have found themselves in the firing line of this war. What the UN Relief Agency is saying is that its convoy was targeted by the IDF, a convoy that included 5 ambulances, 1 fire truck and a UN vehicle, killing 15 of those workers. It included 8 members of the Palestinian Red Crescent, 6 members of the Gaza Civil Defence Force, as well as 1 UNRWA member, of course, the UN agency that looks after Palestinian refugees. What the Israeli military is saying today is that they did indeed fire on those vehicles. They have released a statement saying that the vehicles were, in their words, advancing suspiciously without headlights or emergency signals. They go on to say that 1 Hamas operative was killed, as well as several other militants. But what they are not commenting on are these allegations that those humanitarian relief workers were then placed in a mass grave, in some cases still wearing their paramedic uniforms. It is that incident which is really causing concern amongst the relief groups. The UN is saying that these humanitarian workers were killed while they were trying to save lives. The International Red Cross and Red Crescent says this has been the deadliest attack on its workers in more than 8 years.
Trent, the UN Food Agency is closing all of its bakeries in the Gaza Strip as food supplies dwindle under the Israeli blockade. Is Hamas now under growing pressure from Israel to accept changes to their ceasefire agreement?
Yeah, that blockade now almost reaching 1 month since those critical supplies were able to enter the Gaza Strip. And according to aid agencies, we are now seeing some of the results of that. The UN World Food Programme today saying all of the bakeries across Gaza have now been closed due to a lack of supplies. We are seeing a memo which has been released amongst some of those UN staff saying that they are running out of food and they no longer have enough rations and flour stock to be able to make bread. Now, what the Israelis are saying is that the amount of food that was sent in during the ceasefire period should cover the needs for the roughly 2.3 million people living within the Gaza Strip. They have released some numbers saying 25,000 trucks entered the Strip during that time, and then in a fairly strongly worded attack on Hamas, they said there is more than enough food for a long period of time for the people of Gaza if Hamas lets the civilians have it, is how they end that statement.
And also, let's just shift gears slightly. Israel says it has killed a Hezbollah official in a deadly Beirut airstrike today. What more do we know, and what does this mean for the shaky ceasefire?
Yeah, that's right. Hassan Badia was the target of that strike, according to the Israelis. They hit in the early hours of this morning in Dahia, in the southern suburbs of Beirut, the part of the Lebanese capital that does continue to really see a number of these airstrikes, a real Hezbollah stronghold. The Israelis are saying that he was a member of a Hezbollah unit that was coordinating with Hamas, in their words, and was working on a significant and imminent terror attack against Israeli civilians. Lebanese security sources are saying that 4 people were killed in that strike, including Hassan Badia and his son. But of course, as you rightly say, it does come at a time where there is meant to be a ceasefire right now between Hezbollah and Israel. The Northern Front has been relatively quiet in recent months following that ceasefire. But what we're sort of more seeing broadly, I think, is in the arena of this conflict is tensions are starting to rise once again, not just in the north, but of course as Israel steps up its military manoeuvres once again within the Gaza Strip. And of course as the US says it's now increasing its airstrikes on the Yemen-based Houthis. It would appear right now, as I say, tensions across the wider Middle East are starting to rise once more.
Trent Murray in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for joining me. Let's take another look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Residents in Florida will head to the polls today as voters choose a replacement for Mike Waltz, President Trump's national security advisor. Tuesday's other winner will also succeed former Republican Matt Gaetz, whom Trump originally picked as his attorney general before he withdrew. Citizens in Wisconsin will also get the chance to vote on Tuesday. Control of the House is not at stake, but the outcome could provide some relief for Republicans in the narrowly divided chamber. Jordan Bardella, president of the French far-right National Rally, has criticised the sentencing and election ban of Marine Le Pen, accusing authorities of intentionally blocking his party from taking power. Le Pen was barred from running for office for 5 years and given a 4-year prison sentence for embezzlement on Monday. She intends to appeal the decision, which currently prevents her from running for the French presidency in 2027. The US prosecutors will seek the death penalty for Luigi Mangione, the man accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. The direction came from US Attorney General Pam Bondi, who called the shooting a premeditated, cold-blooded assassination. Mangione has pleaded not guilty and is currently awaiting trial in a New York federal prison. And the Greek islands of Paros and Mykonos have been hit by flash floods, with heavy rainfall set to continue today. The Civil Protection Agency has warned residents to stay indoors, and schools have also been closed. There are currently no reports of injuries on the islands, which are popular tourist destinations. Taiwan has condemned large-scale Chinese military exercises around the island and strongly criticized a series of provocative videos posted on social media by China, saying they aren't conducive to peace. China's military called the Joint Navy, Air Force and rocket exercises a stern warning against Taiwan independence. Will Wayne Williams reports.
Chinese Eastern Theatre Command announced the exercises early on Tuesday, although it's not clear exactly how many vessels and aircraft were involved. One thing we do know is that the Shandong aircraft carrier was spotted by the Taiwanese Defense Ministry. China only has 3 aircraft carriers, and so this in itself could be a particularly strong signal from Beijing. Shortly after the drills commenced, China also released a series of propaganda videos as well as a poster entitled "Closing In." In one of the videos, it depicted Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te as a bug hanging from a pair of chopsticks over a burning Taiwan. China views Taiwan as a part of its sovereign territory and Lai as a separatist, and it does not rule out taking the island by force. Tensions have been increasing since Lai came into power early last year, as he has distanced himself from China and maintained a close relationship with the US. These tensions have particularly come to a head in this past month, with him declaring China a foreign hostile state. Yesterday, the US Defense Secretary wrapped up talks with Japan and the Philippines, where they discussed increasing deterrence against Chinese aggressiveness in the Taiwan Strait. And the timing of this, may have indeed had an impact on these drills taking place today. Other than that, US President Donald Trump is about to unveil a series of new tariffs, and there has also been talk about potential sanctions against Chinese officials as well as Hong Kong officials in relation to alleged human rights abuses. Now, these tensions are something that Taiwanese people are very used to. They've grown up their entire lives with the constant threat of China looming over them. That said, as the tensions are increasing, these military drills are becoming more frequent and more intensive. Taiwanese people are starting to feel more and more concerned about what may be in store for them in the future.
Will Wayne Williams in Taiwan, thank you very much. Let's take a look at the top business news now. Tesla's sales in key European markets fell again in March, according to data out on Tuesday. Sales in France, Sweden, Denmark and the Netherlands have fallen for a third straight month, ahead of first quarter figures out on Wednesday. Billionaire CEO Elon Musk, a close ally of President Trump, has stirred controversy by courting far-right parties in Europe. Now, gold has sailed above $3,140 per ounce to uncharted territory as US tariffs fast approach. According to Julius Baer, gold's recent bull run has benefited from two drivers: growing demand from central banks beginning in spring 2022 and the return of Western safe haven seekers this year. Meanwhile, Goldman Sachs has raised the probability of a US recession to 35% from 20%. Turning to the sports news now, the Russian-born tennis player Daria Kasatkina says she is emotional and excited to begin a fresh chapter in her career under the Australian flag at the ongoing Charleston Open. That comes after she was granted permanent residency last week. The 27-year-old has been playing on the tour as a neutral athlete after Russian and Belarusian players were banned from competing under their own flags following Moscow's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The world number 12, who lives in Dubai and trains in Spain, now plans to make Melbourne her home. And world number 2 golfer Rory McIlroy says he's dealing with an elbow issue ahead of next week's Masters. He finished joint 5th at the Houston Open on Sunday after an impressive final round, but said his elbow had been bothering him. The Masters, which is the only one of golf's 4 majors that McIlroy has not won, takes place at Augusta National in Georgia from the 10th to the 13th of April. A reminder of our top stories. The world waits anxiously for Trump's impending tariffs as businesses, consumers and investors prepare for an all-out trade war. Israel issues evacuation warnings for Rafah, vowing to return to combat in great force after the bodies of emergency workers are discovered. And China launches military drills around Taiwan as a warning against Taiwanese independence. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. The Dressing Room is coming up next. And of course, don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with a GMT. Good night.